I don't remember exactly when it started. Maybe it was that morning when she came back from the store and didn't kiss me. Or maybe it was those rare occasions when she stayed out in the yard longer than usual, saying she was chatting with Mark, our neighbor across the fence. My name is Alex, and I lived with Emma for 8 years. I wouldn't say we were the perfect couple, but we were always a team. We built a house together, lost our first child together. We learned to laugh after tragedies together. I thought those bonds were unbreakable. I was wrong. It all started innocently. Mark is a 40-year-old man, divorced, calm, smiling. We sometimes grilled meat and drank beer together. He was lonely, and we were like a family across the street. He often said, "You and Emma are a real couple. You're lucky, brother." I laughed and nodded in response. But now looking back, I realize it was a game. He wasn't admiring, he wanted. I heard the first alarm bell in the evening when I came home from work early. I usually came in quietly to sneak up behind Emma and hug her. That day the house was strangely quiet. It was only in the kitchen that I heard her voice, restrained but clearly tense. "No, Mark, not now. Alex might come." I froze. My chest felt empty. I stepped back, pretending I had just come in. She met me in the hallway with a slightly forced smile. "You're early," she asked in surprise. "Yes, I'm tired. I decided to come home early." She didn't say a word about the phone call. Neither did I. But I hardly slept that night. Paranoia is a terrible thing, especially when you're trying not to believe the obvious. I started to notice details. How she suddenly started going jogging more often in the morning. How her phone was always on silent. How she answered work when I asked her who was calling, even though I knew Emma had been working from home for a long time, and her colleagues only messaged her on Messenger. I didn't know how to ask. I was afraid, because I was ready for anything, but not for the truth. And yet one day while she was taking a shower, I took her phone. No, not because I wanted to control her, but because I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. The password hadn't changed. The messages were empty. Too empty. She had deleted everything, but she hadn't deleted the voice message from Mark in the archive. I can't forget last night. It was, "I don't know, Em, but I want you again." I don't remember how I sat down on the floor. I don't remember how I got back up. I only remember my heart pounding in my ears. I remember my heart racing when I pushed open the bedroom door. It was ajar, just enough to see the scene that is forever burned into my memory. They were lying on our bed, my wife and him, our neighbor, a simple man with whom I drank beer on weekends, discussing football games and barbecues. I trusted him. I trusted her. They didn't notice me right away. I stood there paralyzed, unable to move or make a sound. My brain couldn't process what was happening, as if my mind was trying to convince me that it was all a dream, a bad, lingering nightmare. When they finally noticed me, there was a long, agonizing pause. My wife screamed and pulled the sheet over herself, as if that could change anything. My neighbor froze, his eyes filled with horror, not out of shame, but out of fear that he had been exposed. You're back early," she muttered. I didn't answer. I just stood there and watched. Everything I had built was falling apart inside me, brick by brick. All the evenings when I thought she was late at work, all the text messages from him that I dismissed as neighborly kindness, all the signals I ignored. "It's not what you think," he said, the standard, pathetic excuse. I smiled. "Really," was all I could say. "What do you think I think, if not that?" She was crying. Tears streamed down her face, but they meant nothing anymore. I heard her sobbing, trying to come up with an explanation on the fly, as if a single word could bring back what was lost. I left. I didn't say a word. I closed the door behind me and just walked away, on foot, without a destination. I felt that if I stayed there for even another minute, I would explode. I walked down the street, seeing nothing around me. There was white noise in my head. No anger, no pain, just emptiness. I walked where my feet took me. I went into a 24-hour store and bought a bottle of whiskey, even though I hadn't drunk in 3 years. I just needed something to numb the pain. I spent the whole night sitting in my car by the old bridge. It was raining. I looked out the window and thought how strange it was. Water washes away the marks on the glass, but it doesn't wash away memories. In the morning I returned home. The house was quiet. Emma was sitting on the couch, frozen, her eyes filled with tears. I walked past her. We didn't speak. No breakfast, no reproaches, no shouting, just silence, which was more painful than any argument. She tried to talk in the days that followed. Alex, I don't know what came over me. It doesn't mean anything. It was stupid. It was a mistake. The mistake was that I once believed that we would always be together, that she was mine forever. I listened. Sometimes I nodded. Sometimes I left the room, but I wasn't there anymore, not with my mind or my heart. A week later, I started packing my things, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't do anything else. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew that staying in that house, in that bed, at that table, meant dying inside every day. She was standing in the bedroom doorway as I folded my t-shirts into my suitcase. "Please don't go," she whispered. I can't live without you." I stopped. I looked at her, the woman I loved, the woman who looked me in the eyes and lied while she slept with another man. "You're already gone, Emma," I said quietly, long before I was. I closed the suitcase and left. At first, after I left, I lived in my younger brother's apartment. He was away on business and left me the key in case I wanted to escape the routine. Neither he nor I knew how accurate that premonition would turn out to be. Every morning I woke up on an unmade bed and out of habit reached out my hand to the left where Emma used to lie. But now there was only emptiness and a cold sheet. Habits die slowly, especially those that have been built up over years. I started going to the gym, not because I wanted to, because I needed to distract myself somehow. My body was tired, my muscles ached, but my mind kept returning to that moment when I saw them together, to our bedroom, to her eyes full of fear, to my chest where now there was only an echo. Sometimes I imagined calling her, telling her everything I hadn't had time to say, screaming or staying silent. Sometimes I got as far as the call screen and just turned off the phone. What was the point? A month later, I ran into Mark at the supermarket. He didn't look well either, unshaven with red eyes. We bumped into each other in the snack aisle. He looked down. "Alex," he muttered, "I'm sorry." I looked at him, at the man who had betrayed not only me, but the very essence of what it means to be a neighbor, a friend, a man. I didn't say anything. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to fight. I just wanted him to disappear. I walked past him, without a word. The worst punishment for him was to live with that on his conscience. I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. Sometimes I remembered not the betrayal, but what came before it. How we laughed, how we chose wallpaper for the kitchen, how we argued about who would get up first on our day off. The most painful thing wasn't the betrayal. The most painful thing was the realization that all of that had been, and then it became nothing. I started writing a diary just to keep myself from going crazy. The pages were wet with coffee and sometimes with tears, even though I was ashamed of myself. Men don't cry, right? But I felt that if I didn't let it out, I would break. One morning, waking up in that same lonely room, I realized I'm not waiting for her to call anymore. I'm not checking my messages anymore. I started living. A little, but I started. It was a normal morning, Friday. I had just come back from the gym, put the kettle on for tea, and was about to scroll through the news when I noticed an envelope on the floor. No stamp, no return address. Just a white envelope tucked under the door. I knew who it was from. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The paper smelled familiar. Was it her perfume or pain? The handwriting was the same, clear, neat, with a slight slant to the right. Alex, I know I have no right to write this. I don't know if you'll read it to the end, but I have to try. I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the person who was my home, and it's my fault. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have, and maybe I always will. I destroyed us. I destroyed myself. And every day without you is a reminder that there are mistakes that cannot be fixed. I'm not expecting a reply. I just wanted you to know. I still remember our first night together, watching a movie under a blanket and eating ice cream with spoons. I'm sorry for everything. I finished reading. I didn't know what to feel. On the one hand, every word echoed in my chest. On the other hand, what was the point? Love isn't just feelings. It's a choice. Every day. And she didn't make that choice. I put the letter in my desk drawer. I didn't tear it up. I didn't burn it. I just left it there. As a memory. As a warning. That evening I went out into the street. It was drizzling, just like when I left home. Only now I wasn't hiding from the raindrops. I walked with my head held high. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know who would come into my life. But I knew one thing for sure. I no longer wanted to live in the shadow of other people's mistakes. I started writing a new chapter, not with someone else, with myself. 6 months passed. Life slowly fell into a rhythm, not the same as before, but different. I still woke up alone. I still ate in silence. I still felt that something was unfinished inside me, but it didn't hurt anymore. I moved to a new neighborhood, a small apartment on the 5th floor overlooking a park. In the mornings, mothers with strollers walked there, and in the evenings, joggers and dogs. A cozy corner where no one knew me. And that was good. I started working remotely. I wrote articles for magazines and took on editing jobs. Sometimes I looked through old photos, no longer with pain, but with gratitude. For the experience, for the lessons, for the fact that I am now a different person. Sometimes at dawn, I remembered how Emma laughed in her sleep, how we planned our vacations, how we believed we would be together forever. These memories were like old scars. They no longer hurt, but the reminder remains. Once, sitting on a park bench with a cup of coffee, I noticed a woman with a book. She smiled when our eyes met. Simple, calm, without expectations. I smiled back. We didn't talk. We didn't exchange phone numbers, but there was something real in that silence, something I had once forgotten. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe someone new will come into my life. Maybe not. But now I know wholeness isn't when someone holds your hand. It's when you hold yourself, when you know how to be alone, not lonely, but at peace. I still have Emma's letter. It has become a symbol that even pain can be useful, that even betrayal can be a beginning, because sometimes the end is just a door leading to a better beginning. Sometimes, to hear yourself, you need to stay in silence. And it was in that silence that I found myself. I didn't blame Emma. I blame myself for being blind, for not seeing the signs, or seeing them but not wanting to believe them. We often convince ourselves that everything is fine because we are afraid to admit the truth, because the truth requires action. And I was tired. I just wanted peace. Sometimes I replayed that night over and over in my head, not the scenes of betrayal, no, but everything that led up to it, the moments when I could have changed something, when I could have been more attentive, asked questions, listened, supported, or left earlier before everything fell apart. But then I realized that no one deserves to be betrayed, not a single person, even if they're not perfect. I thought about this a lot in the silence of the night. You know when it gets so quiet in the house that even the clock seems loud? It was in those moments that I heard more than just the ticking. I heard everything that wasn't said, all the words we kept to ourselves, all the resentment swept under the rug. When it was all over, I didn't immediately understand what I had lost. Not my wife, not my home, but an illusion. The illusion that we were us. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that I didn't even miss Emma. I missed the habit of being with her. The morning coffee we drank in silence. The glances we exchanged over dinner. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. It wasn't love. It was the shadow of a life I had built and lost. When I started to rebuild my life, I was surprised by simple things. How difficult it was to cook for one. How strange it was to buy a single toothbrush. How empty the silence sounded when no one slammed the bathroom door or turned on the water in the morning. At first, I thought loneliness would break me, but it didn't. It became a mirror. I began to see myself in it as I had never seen myself before. Not as a husband, not as a devoted man, just as a human being, with my fears and vulnerabilities, but also with a strength I never knew I had. I wrote down my thoughts every night, sometimes a single sentence, sometimes a page. It became a kind of therapy. I didn't plan to share these texts. They were for me, and only me. 3 months passed before I allowed myself to smile again. Sometimes my neighbor from the floor above would come in, an old man named Victor. He brought homemade pies and told stories about his youth and the wife he had lost many years ago. In these stories, I heard not only pain, but also warmth. He once said, "You know, son, betrayal is like a burn. At first it hurts, then a scar remains. But if you do everything right, the scar doesn't hurt. It's just there." For some reason, those words stuck in my head. I started to look at my past differently, not as a failure, but as a lesson. I no longer remembered Emma with hatred. On the contrary, I accepted her. Everyone makes their own choices. And sometimes people hurt others not because they want to, but because they don't know how to do otherwise. Spring came soon. I started running in the mornings, without headphones, just listening to my breathing, the sounds of the street, the rhythm of my own body. It became my anchor, my way forward, without being tied to the past. One evening I stopped on a bridge over the river. I watched the water slowly carry away last year's leaves and reflect the streetlights. It was quiet. Not the kind of silence that makes you want to scream, but a different kind. A silence that was full. Inside, there was no more ringing. I remembered the night when everything was revealed. I remembered standing in the bedroom doorway, unable to believe that I was hearing her laughter not in a movie or on the phone, but behind our wall. At that moment, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. But now, standing on the bridge, I suddenly realized that if it hadn't been for that night, this evening would never have happened. I wouldn't be here, not the real me. The next day, I went back to the park, to the place where I had seen the woman with the book. She was sitting on the same bench. This time I approached her. "May I sit down?" She nodded. We sat in silence, listening to the wind playing with the leaves. "Do you come here often?" I asked. Almost every evening, she replied. It's peaceful here. We didn't talk for long about books, coffee, the silence. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't need to tell her. A couple of weeks later, I saw her again. She was reading the same book, or maybe she was just holding it, out of habit like a shield. This time, the conversation went deeper. We talked about time and how it changes people. I didn't notice how an hour had passed. I thought I'd never be able to talk like this again, I confessed. She looked at me, silent for a long time, and said, "We all think that, until we meet someone who speaks more softly than our pain." That phrase stayed with me, like a pebble in my pocket, a reminder that new connections don't heal old wounds, but they can help you live with them. I didn't fall in love, it would have been too soon, but I allowed myself to feel, and that turned out to be enough. We didn't write to each other. We didn't make plans. We just sat on the same bench sometimes, in the evening coolness and the streetlights. Sometimes even silence becomes support when it is shared. I no longer returned to that bedroom in my mind. I didn't look for someone to blame. I accepted that we were both tired and confused. I wasn't the one she needed, and she wasn't the one I was meant to spend my life with. Forgiveness came quietly, not like a revelation, but like fatigue from anger. I stopped writing in my night notebook. I opened a blank page and couldn't find the words. And then I realized, this is a sign. There is nothing left to say inside. When we sat on the bench for the last time, she said, "It's amazing how little it takes to feel less alone." I nodded. I agreed. Sometimes it's enough just to be there. No explanations, no labels. Now, when someone asks me what happened to me, I smile. Because this story isn't about how I was betrayed. It's about how I found myself, how I started listening, seeing, forgiving. And if I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing, because that's how I became who I am.